Hello and welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast, the space where ideas turn into actions and dreams become reality. I'm your host, Beenish Mirza, and in each episode I will sit down with some really wonderful, incredible women who've taken a spark of inspiration and transformed into something so meaningful. These are real stories of purpose, passion, and perseverance. So wherever you're listening from, settle in and get ready to be inspired. I'm so excited to introduce you to Salma Ibrahim. She's an emerging voice in fiction whose work is deeply rooted in themes of identity, family, home, self-discovery, and different geographical locations. Her novel Salutation Road is a semi-autobiography journey of Sirad, a young girl from a Somali background growing up in southeast London. It's a tender, reflective, and at times raw exploration of belonging, expectations, and the personal hurdles many of us face trying to find our own place in the world. In my chat with Salma, she opens up about her own love of reading, her early bookstore obsession and library visits with her family, and how those quiet spaces helped her make sense of who she was and what she wanted from her life. We also talk about how her university helped her find the spark to become a novelist, and where exactly is Salutation Road. You'll hear about Sirad's world in two parts, all set across two parallel lives. I cannot wait for you to join this episode to hear directly from Salma around her vision of the book, what else she's been involved in, how you can get involved, what else she has on the horizon. So welcome, Salma. So lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for letting me share your story. It'd be so wonderful for those who might not have come across your work before, if you could just reintroduce yourself, a bit about you, a bit about your book.
Hi, Beenish. Thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. I'm really excited to talk about Salutation Road with you. Just to give you an introduction for those of you who are not familiar with my novel, I wrote a novel called Salutation Road, and I'm a debut author, so this is actually my first published novel. I love to write about themes of memory, nostalgia, family, and migration. So this is very much my first exploration into this vein of writing. I'm a literary author, and this book was won the London Writers' Award in 2019, where I developed the story further, and it also was the runner-up for the Future Worlds Prize in 2021, which is a prize for science fiction and fantasy writing. And yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring more with you.
Amazing. So can you tell us a bit more about, where you grew up, a bit about your family, what inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, I grew up in Southeast London in Greenwich, which is actually where the book is set. And I was very much inspired by my surroundings. Coming from a Somali family, my parents are Somali, and they very much are familiar with that immediate post-war experience of what life was like after the war in the 90s. And I just saw that our lives was really inexplicably entwined with the immigrant experience, and so much of how we saw the world, our sense of place and belonging was shaped by my parents' experiences with moving away from their homeland and everything that they knew in Somalia to come to the UK. And growing up in Greenwich, I always felt like I was almost in my own little bubble from the rest of London. And I think I read about this in essays and discussions by Zadie Smith, where she wrote about Northwest London, and a lot of her books were very much rooted in that part of London. And she said that for them, their centre and their world was Northwest London. It wasn't the London that others know. It wasn't like, Buckingham Palace and Oxford Street and things like that. Of course, that is still part of the experience, but I felt very much shaped by like this very contained world in Greenwich, and I'm inspired by the nature, the people that live there, the stories that take place in there. So that's why I wanted to set Salutation Road in Greenwich. And overall, what inspired me is I tend to start my stories from my protagonist, and I think about what they're going through. A lot of it is quite autobiographical, because in the beginning of the novel, Sirad is taking a walk along the river in Greenwich, and she's thinking about a lot of her regrets and feelings about where she is in the world and who she will become. And there's a lot of angst there, which I think lots of people who are in the early 20s or have been in the early 20s can relate to, that sense of, frustration. Maybe things are not going the way that they hoped. The others seem to might be having it easier. And, so much responsibility is thrust upon her at the beginning of the book, which you'll see her grapple with. So I was thinking about those experiences, and my book is almost like a collage of experiences that many of those from the Somali background will be familiar with, whether that's family, relationships, their thoughts on migration, that's that sort of struggle to climb up the career ladder and find oneself more secure. I collage the book with these experiences and things that I've seen in my own life, in my siblings' lives, in my family, and friends' lives. And that's, yeah, the book kind of came to me in that fashion.
Yeah, wonderful. And I know before, when we were just talking offline as well, you mentioned that you have this love of reading. It would be great if you could just share a bit more about where that came from.
Yeah. So I decided to become a novelist because reading was such a important cornerstone in my life that I really couldn't imagine my life without it. And it got to a point where I was reading and I was reading and I was enjoying so many amazing books. And a lot of that was fostered by my parents because they sort of saw reading as like our key um, to really being able to thrive and integrate in the UK. So my dad would take me to the library often. He'd take me to bookstores, and what would happen is I found myself almost needing to read, not just because I liked it as a pastime, but because it was my way of understanding myself. It was my way of understanding the world around me. And so in university, after I'd read so many amazing works of literature, I was studying literature actually. I decided to write a novel to be able to respond to some of these themes that other writers were writing about and exploring, and just to feel a part of that conversation.
Great. And coming back to your book, the title itself, Salutation Roads, is so intriguing. Can you tell us a bit more about what inspired the title, even the cover? It's so attractive. It'd be lovely to hear where that came from.
Thank you. So interestingly enough, my original title was actually Frankincense because the scent of frankincense is something that elicits so much memory and nostalgia and really difficult, complex feelings. But it was changed to Salutation Road because I guess my publisher, she felt that the place that this book takes place in Salutation Road was really significant and that was almost grounding the text. So Salutation Road is actually a real place. It's a road not far from me, but interestingly enough, nothing happens there. I think there's just a few different warehouses. It's not fancy at all. I don't think they even have a cafe on that in that particular street. But it's intriguing because the fact that nothing happens there always drew me to it. And I always felt that it was almost like this no man's land. It had this very eerie undertone. And I imagined that if there was this book about a parallel world, it would take place there because it's almost like this limbo between the two worlds. So, yeah, Salutation Road, if anyone visits, you might find that, yeah, it's got this almost movie-like quality where it feels like something major could happen here, but at the same time, nothing's happening there at all.
That's so interesting. And the parallel lives concept, so you really talk about it, you've touched upon it a bit. Where did the concept of wanting to include a story around parallel lives come from?
So I guess I've always been fascinated by the idea of time, and growing up, like I just loved, exploring this in like movies and cartoons. And in cartoon series, they always have the episode where there's like a parallel world and there's like a parallel version of them. And I always found that quite funny. And I just thought it would be fun to explore that in a book that also looks at quite serious themes. It gives it almost like a light-hearted edge, and at the same time something that isn't rooted in reality gives us an opportunity to understand reality further, if that makes sense. There's this sense that if I almost remove the rules of like what is possible in our known world, then you get the reader to think a lot more broadly and you get them to think without those inhibitions. So that's kind of why I like the idea of like sci-fi or fantasy, that speculative element in my writing. And at the same time, because the book is set in Greenwich and you know about GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, like that significance of time in Greenwich felt like it was the perfect place to explore a parallel world and like time moving differently.
Great, thank you. And you chose to set the book in 2016, is that correct? What was the sort of reason behind that?
So 2016 was actually it's actually the year that I graduated university, and I remember um being back in Greenwich because I was studying in Southampton at the time, and just feeling like I just come back to a whole different world, in the sense that there was a lot going on politically. All of a sudden, I felt this sense of unease, and there were a lot of discussions about migration and immigrants and you know um the idea of the good immigrant was being explored, like what does it mean to be like the right type of immigrant and what are the connotations of that. And at the same time I felt, because there was a lot of discussion about it, I wasn't sure whether I really belonged anymore. I never felt that feeling up until that point. And I felt like the identity of like the Muslim and the immigrant was coming under examination in a way that it hadn't been before, not to that level, or at least not to a level where I felt very conscious of it and it didn't feel personal at that point. Um, and this was all happening in the background. So I felt that to root this book in 2016, I didn't want to like take on these topics head on, but I wanted them to almost be like something happening in the background, and something that almost in a way, like it problematizes Surad's coming of age at some points. It gets her to think maybe at some points a bit more critically, and at some points she isn't. She's just sort of doing what she's doing and she's coasting along and making mistakes. So yeah, 2016, that year of Trump's election, and there was the referendum, the Brexit referendum happening in the UK as well. I felt that it was almost like an example of how politics infringes on personal and everyday life.
Yeah, yeah, I remember 2016 very well. So yeah, very interested to hear how that comes through in the book as well. You touched upon some of the characters in your book. I always love hearing from the authors around what they were hoping the characters shine through and what their personality and traits are like. So could you introduce us a little bit more to the main characters in the book and how they tie back to you and your own life experiences?
Yeah. So, so Siride is my protagonist. She's 23 when this book begins, and the book is actually in two halves. So you find that there's the early part before, and when she takes that journey to the parallel world and everything that happens, and then we get like a second part which is slightly older, and you see how that journey sort of affects her life and her ability to move on. Um, she is, I would say, flawed, well-meaning in many ways. She's a highly sensitive person, so a lot of the time she's really examining how she feels about things. Um, and at many points, she can be quite stoic as well. So she doesn't always outright show her emotions. She's the kind of person who feels that she has to be strong for others around her. So you get a lot of that. She's deeply affected by nostalgia. So throughout the book, there is this mood of, you know, thinking back to the past, sometimes idealizing the past in a way and just looking at it through this very rosy lens, which is very real because a lot of us do sometimes relate to this feeling of like, even if something was difficult, and maybe even mundane, we still have a way of glorifying it and romanticizing it in our in our memory. So she's Sarad, and her mother in the book, who we meet early on, is struggling with her mental health. Um, and I almost wanted to use the mother's character to examine like the the very silent but violent nature of mental health. We don't really deal with the topic head on in the book, so it's not something that's a major theme, but it's this almost tragic and quiet thing that's happening in the background. And I felt that Sirad's mum is almost like she represents a lot of a lot of immigrants who experience mental health in this way. It's never explicitly discussed in the sense that there are no real like solutions and tools maybe immediately presented, but it's something that's almost like slowly taking over the household and just really coloring their experiences and their conversations and her worldview. So I wanted to explore that through Sirad's mum, but at the same time, she's also someone with her own dreams, and she's also someone who, in many ways, never got to realize them. So Sirad realizes that, and her relationship with her mother changes throughout the story and deepens in many ways. She has her brother, who is, he's young, he's doing his exams at the point of that book, in the beginning of the book, sorry, and he's also in his own way going through his own coming of age journey. So even though he's not necessarily a huge character in the book, he appears at different points. We get a sense that Sirad isn't just like coming of age alone. There are other people around her who are also making sense of who they are and where they should be. We get her friendship with Rosie, very different character to her, grew up completely differently. But even though they grew up differently, there are moments of like where their identities converge. And Sirad isn't always the greatest friend, right? Either to Rosie or even to her double Ubah. But there's a lot of opportunity for her to grow and to learn from her mistakes and to not see the world in such a two-dimensional way. So we get her character development throughout the book. And one of my favorite characters is Maxine, who's a librarian, and she is this older woman, Jamaican background. She has so much experience in the community, so she's almost like this, in a way, like a community elder as a librarian. She runs different programs for young people. Um, and she has so much wisdom that she imparts in the book with Surat, not in a way that feels like she's preaching or she's really trying to shape exactly who she is, but it's very gentle, it's really considered. And yeah, I love how their friendship develops throughout the book, and how even though there are different ages, they have very different like roles in society, they find a way to like lean on each other, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, and it sounds so interesting because through what you're describing, it sounds like there's topics of community, mental health, maybe hidden personas and traits through that, and just seeing how the different personalities play out in your book will be something I'm very intrigued to read about. And then so I wanted to know, okay, so you talk about Sirad, having two versions of her, being the same person. How did you find, the writing process around writing about this character in two different forms?
Yeah, I found writing Sirad and Ubah actually one of the most challenging parts of the book, like just because they are the same in a way, but they're also very distinct. And what makes them distinct is the fact that the way time sort of goes on in their lives shaped them to be very different in their environment. So Sirad, like I mentioned earlier, she's this angsty young person, so can be quite impulsive sometimes, but very well meaning and deeply sensitive. And then we have Ubah, who's so much more so much more strong-willed, I would say. She has a strong idea of who she is and who she should be. But there is someone underneath that who is very deeply affected as well by her circumstances. Um, and when I wrote them, I wanted to make sure that they had very distinct voices. So I wanted to make sure that they didn't sound the same and have the same sort of way of going about things. With Ubah, in many ways, there's this hardness to her. But there are some instances where that she shows some vulnerability, and that vulnerability, I also wanted that to come across authentically as well. It was very challenging to write their characters, but one of my favorite chapters is in chapter 7, where they come together, and I won't spoil it for anyone who's reading it. But when you see their interactions, like just the subtleties and the differences in the way that they maybe talk or sit and look at things, you would find that actually they're very distinct. They're very almost two whole characters. Yeah, not almost, but definitely two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really nice. And so you talk about, themes of strength, vulnerability, grief of unfulfilled dreams with the mother. How important was it for you as a writer to bring these themes out and tell that narrative in your stories?
Yeah. I felt that when I was exploring these themes, I felt almost like I had a sense of responsibility to explore them as fully as I could. And this is the almost the difficult part of being an author and writing is that there may be people who feel like you could have explored things much more deeply, much more maybe in line with their experience. And that's always difficult to do because I can't capture everyone's vast experiences in one book. And there's only so much I can put in the book about a particular theme or experience. So, yeah, sometimes that can be quite frustrating. However, I think just being able to touch on those themes and include them almost offers like a bit of a springboard for the reader to go and explore them further. I didn't want to write things into the book as a way of finding a solution rather, but more just to open a discussion and ignite some kind of curiosity in the reader. So if they're fascinated about the idea of community and third spaces and what it means to, like, for example, the library, like how much of a cornerstone that is in a society, and the loss of that, then maybe they can go further from this book and explore that a little bit more somewhere else if they're interested. So I think for me, it was giving readers enough of a taster of things that they could feel inspired to lean into this particular theme later on if they want to.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And you've also founded Literary Natives. Can you tell us a bit about that, why it matters to you and your involvement with it to date?
Yeah. So Literary Natives was an organization I launched in 2018. And the word organization sounds really big and official, but really all it was me and a friend of mine who we were both writing novels, and she was writing more for a younger audience, like a middle grade book, and I was writing this story actually. And we just felt that there weren't enough spaces where we could meet other writers because we were basically the only writers that we knew in each other, and we found each other leaning on each other for support and questions and just like sharing the difficulties of the experience. And we felt like it would be really enriching to have a space where other authors could get together and meet other aspiring authors and also meet published authors. That was a very important part of it, like to see someone who had come out the other side of the experience and published a novel and hear from them and their highs and their lows. So that was what Literary Natives was about. And we had like a monthly panel event, and we would invite like a group of debut authors to read from their books and also talk about the actual publishing experience. And then it would just kind of be a bit of a mixer, like people would just be able to like talk to each other and, just like make friends. And I found it really like such an essential part of my early experience writing this book because I felt like I was almost doing it in community, and that there were people who were aware of like my journey and or encouraging me along the way. So that was really lovely. And I think it got to 2020 in the pandemic, and obviously we weren't doing physical events anymore. And at the time I was really like in the thick of it with my novel because I was on the London Writers Award program, so I was developing the novel, getting feedback. But at the same time, I was experiencing a lot of rejection with sending my book out. And I felt that I needed to take a step away from Literary Natives, A, because we weren't doing physical events. And I felt that I needed space to reprogram Literary Natives and think about how can we do this in a way that is fit for this new world that we're living in now, where everything isn't always in person. And also, I felt that it was very important to me get to actually get my book published and get to the end of that and like focus a bit more of my energy on, getting my work out there and gathering learnings, and then be able to come back to Literary Natives one day and share those learnings. So now I'm at the point where I'm like, I really would love to like reprogram it, bring back those events that we used to have, and even do like more digital things. But yeah, that's definitely something pending.
And I'm always so intrigued and inspired actually by the ability for that community collaboration involvement, particularly when creatives take that community on that journey with them. And it sounds like that's something that was fundamental to the success or the foundations of your own career journey. It'd be so wonderful if you could just tell us a little bit more about how, you're very visibly Muslim, you're a Somali British, that's how you introduce yourself, how you went about really navigating that space, creating that space for yourself. And you talked a bit about how you founded the organization, but it'd just be nice to know how, if people were interested in the similar work that you do, how can they also be inspired to get involved?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because right now I'm actually writing my second book, and a lot of it is just me sitting in my living room on this very chair and just yeah, a laptop, and I think this is such a solitary thing to write alone and to like go into one's imagination and produce, produce a novel. But I almost want to make this almost like a community experience. And even right now, I'm thinking, how can I sort of bring this experience out there into a more public space where others can see how a novel is put together? So I think it's important to have almost like a bit of a support system, and that doesn't have to be like, a particular event. It could just be friends. Like sometimes I've been in circles where friends just share extracts of their work with each other and just give each other feedback. So that's really powerful. But I would love to continue writing my second book in community. So maybe have like a physical space, and that could be literary natives again, but a space where like I can write at the same time as other authors and we could just sit down together, maybe have breaks to like share any, useful insights, but then take each other along in that journey. I think it makes a massive difference when you're writing because in the beginning, especially if you're not yet published and you don't have an agent yet, it's just you and your work. So you can sometimes get to a place where you're almost doubting whether you're doing okay. If this is this going to amount to anything? And you need almost like a space where you can check in with others. So that's the importance of community, and that's what made me want to continue, developing literary natives, and also a big reason now why I want to be able to go back to that space and ensure that writers have a community. You know.
It's so powerful when you hear those voices, you create the space to just listen to what is it that people want, what do people want to hear. And I love the fact that you talked about your own learning through there, right? Like what you took away from people you met within those communities as well. Thank you so much. So, what is it that you're hoping people feel and take away from reading your book?
I hope that people just, because it's a book about parallel worlds and there's a lot of make believe in that, I hope they just firstly enjoy that sort of something imaginative and can step out of their reality for a moment and imagine a world where something different is possible. I think so much of reading, the joy of reading that we experience when we're children, like the idea that something completely made up, and most of us have read like Harry Potter or something like that. That feeling of make believe, I think it's so inspiring. And as adults, we lose that ability to be in touch with that. So if I can inspire someone to get in touch with that through my book, that would be amazing. Secondly, I want the reader to think about their own memories and their own nostalgic experiences and just spend some time reflecting on those moments that made them who they are today. And they can be very simple and even mundane. Like sometimes it's not like the big moments, like the milestones that almost quietly influence you. It's like the mundane things. It's, for example, the walks that you used to take with a particular friend. It's the food that maybe your grandma used to make you, or maybe a particular ritual or routine that you had with a sibling. Like things like that make us who we are. And I think nostalgia, it's actually a really beneficial experience because I know some people think, "Oh, I'm feeling nostalgic, so it must be that I'm just too much in my head or thinking too much." But actually, the more you think in that way, the more inspired you feel, the more in touch with your sense of self you become. And ultimately, in the book, it's all about fate and understanding and accepting fate. And even though something happened, it doesn't mean that that you still can't make way for a much more positive future. And in the novel, Sirad is that's the thing that she's sort of dealing with. She makes mistakes in the book. However, throughout in the second part of the book, we'll see that she realizes that escaping isn't always the answer, and that sometimes you just need to accept that something has happened, accept that you've made a mistake, and use that experience to go forward with much more clarity and caution.
Great. And I know when you were talking about reading and your walks, and you've touched upon the old and the new. And I think I can't remember if it was during the call now or when we spoke before, you mentioned about the beauty and the weight of history and time combined together, which is a common theme throughout your book. You talk about, the fate, memories, reigniting your own memories through the sense of the book. It sounds so interesting. Could you also tell us a little bit more about your new book then? What is that going to be based around? What sort of themes are coming out of that as well?
Yeah, and just to go back to that, the idea of the weight of history. Um, I I grew up in Greenwich, and recently I also moved here with my husband again back to Greenwich. And I made that choice because I just found, again, like being by the river and just like watching the flow of the water and like thinking about this space where it's both old and new at the same time. That to me is very inspiring. And in a way, my second book, it kind of comes from that same feeling that produced Salutation Road. So my second book, without saying too much, it's also about memory, but it's in a slightly different way. It's the idea of imagined and transferred memories. So if you can imagine, obviously you have your own memory of things, a space where maybe someone else could remember your own deepest memories and the most vulnerable memories of you, and what that does to a relationship. So I'm looking at specifically like almost like a bit of an unlikely romance in a way. And it's all about the idea of childhood and how childhood memories and experiences and um, what is modeled in our childhood affects us in our adulthood, and how much we can try to, run away from that sometimes or accept it and build like a healthier pattern. Um, it's I used to love video games growing up, so there's a big thing there about like video games and the nostalgia of particular video games, and so kind of like Salutation Road place is a big part of this novel. So where it's located, I can't say too much about that, but it's the place that this book is located in is almost a character in of itself. So if you like again, almost like a slow lyrical story that explores memory and relationships and, you know, like the everyday and how that changes who we are, then you're going to love my second book. Yeah.
That's so interesting that you want to give places a personality.
Mm.
I love that. And I love hearing that from authors because it also sets the tone in which maybe, readers who may listen to this can also imagine the places to be when they read your books. Thank you so much for your time today, Salma. It's been so wonderful speaking to you. Can you tell us where can people get in touch with you? Where can they get hold of your book in the UK, in the UAE, and globally?
Sure. So you can follow me on Instagram, and that's usually where I like share little snippets of what I'm working on or my inspirations. So that's salma.s.ibrahim on Instagram. And in terms of where you can get Salutation Road, if you're in the UK, you can find it in most like major bookshops. So that's Waterstones. You'll be able to find it maybe in some independent bookstores, although I would check. But you can always request and order it to your local independent bookshop if it's not in there. But Waterstones will be a good bet. I might share the link with you at the end, Beanish, the Pan Macmillan link, because that is also where you could order the book from as well. Um, and in the UAE, I think you said you can get it from Kinokuniya. I think that's.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
I'll see if there's anywhere else that is also being stocked. Um, there's also Amazon. You can also get my book on Amazon if that's easier for you. And yeah, and you can also order it directly from the publisher. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much once again. It's been so great to hear your story, hear about the characters in the book, and we can't wait to invite you back for round two when your next book's out as well.
Thank you so much, Vianish. This was really lovely. I really enjoyed that. And maybe when I'm next in the UAE, it'd be really nice, yeah, to maybe meet up and do maybe like a physical book club or something like that. That'd be enjoyable.
Yeah, that'll be so wonderful. Thank you so much for tuning into the Coaching Chapters podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired and reminded you of what's possible when you follow your own calling, your own passion. If you loved this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. And remember, every big journey starts with a small idea, a small passion, and a small calling for purpose.